So I'm very excited to be here to share the research we have been doing in the Foundation Interface Lab at UCSD. I've been very fortunate to work very closely with my wonderful colleague, Jim Holland, and a bunch of my amazing PhD students. So in our lab, the overarching research question we are exploring is, what are the foundational principles of a productive and convivial information environment? And in this environment, we hope human cognition, digital computation, and information representations can be seamlessly integrated. And for the past few years, of course, a more concrete question, not surprisingly, is how will AI transform our information activity and environment? And the title of this talk has already given the answer away, right? So we think the generative, malleable, and personal user interface is a very promising direction. And we are not the only group of people thinking about this. And as I will try to point out, this vision for such interface has been pursued or being pursued for decades in our community. So the goal of my talk is sort of try to share with you guys what we have been imagining, what's the look and feel of such interface, and what is our current approach towards it. So if you think about the types of different ways of using AI in our information activity, there are three main types, right? One is using these models to generate a specific type of content. And this way of using AI can speed up the process of information activity by supplying us the content we need. Another way of using AI is through these chatbots, right? Aside from refine your writing or help you draft an email, one thing that's really interesting is how it can help with exploratory information activities, such as understanding a new domain through a series of Q&A. Now, of course, chatbot is very limited, right? Because many complex information activities require diverse sources of information and different functionality. And that's why probably the agentic workflow seems just more compelling, right? Anthropic releases computer use in their demonstration, and recently OpenAI's operator. And these AI agents can sort of receive a user's request and then manipulate the apps or browser on your computer, and I think this is just a remarkable tech achievement. But I think this approach has a serious problem. And if we are going down this path, we will not be able to fully leverage human cognition and AI to achieve productive information activity. Now, before I take an HCI perspective on this, let's take a historical view on this problem or this phenomenon. Right? Because I think the computer use demonstration and the OpenAI operator is the perfect example of what we used to say, or Mark Twain used to say, history doesn't repeat itself, but often rhymes. So the Stanford audience should know this example really well. Back in the first industrial revolution, right, the steam engine was the main power source, right? And each factory will have, they had this one steam engine that drive the entire factory. So basically, through the axles or on the ceiling, and also the the belts and the pulleys, this one steam engine is able to drive all these individual machines on the floor. And so when you're designing the factory, you have to consider how the power is delivered. The machine that needed the most power must be positioned very close to the power source, because if it's very far, the axle will be broken, right, because of torque. So basically, the layout of the factory is designed to accommodate the power delivery mechanism. And electricity drove the second industrial revolution, right? And so what people did, so Eric Benioffson and Andrew McAfee found that people simply just bought the largest electric motors and replaced the steam engine. They just put it where it used to be, right? They didn't change the factory layout. They didn't change how things are manufactured. And as a result, the productivity barely improved for over 30 years. And things were only changed when new layout was designed or new manufacturing workflow were introduced, and the productivity skyrocketed. So what's so critical about these layout? Well, the layout or the new workflow meets the natural workflow of the material. So let's take a look at our graphical user interface now. Just for the sake of metaphor, let's consider this application-based graphical user interface to be the first UI revolution, right? And with this kind of design, we are the power source that drive each individual app to achieve our information activity, right? Now, and if you actually compare this with the factory, it's quite similar, right? Each individual app is kind of an individual machine, right? And they work together to help you achieve the activity. And instead of just manufacturing physical materials, we're producing digital materials. So what are we doing now with AI? Well, those computer use demonstration is basically trying to replace human with AI. Right now, AI is the power source that drive these machines. So we're substituting human with AI. Now, if we take a page from history, we probably should think about how we should redesign this information environment, right? And actually, you don't need to take the page from history. Like there has been a lot of evidence in HCI that argues the application-centric information paradigm is not very conducive to complex information activity. So Bonnie Nardi, who studied extensively how human uses computer to accomplish information activity, summarized really well. She said the traditional information interface paradigm does not support the complexity, flexibility, or sociality of human activity, and argues that we should move beyond the rigidity of separate applications or file and folder system. Now, to figure out how we should really move beyond, I think we need to answer 3 questions. One is, what is the natural workflow of information activity, right? And the second is, why has the application-centric information interface paradigm failed to achieve this workflow? And third is, what's different this time with AI, right? So let's dive into these questions. Now, there has been a lot of work in HCI that study how humans engage with information activity. And hats off to these seminal works. And if I ask you, maybe one phrase you will come up to describe the workflow of information activity could maybe it's this iterative process of collecting, processing, and editing information. So I think this statement is true, but not very helpful for 2 reasons. First, I think the word iterative, which we often use in HCI, is really sugarcoating the complexity of human information activity. And also, I don't think it really reveals the key reason why we have to go through this messy process. So I think the human information activity, or some people have this thought, is that the human information activity is very dynamic. It's actually a very chaotic process, right? You need to find all kinds of information sources, try to determine which one is useful or not, and then revise your goal, form a new understanding, and then go find other things. And I think another aspect that we should talk more is personal. And what I mean by that is, when you engage with information activity, you have a specific goal, right? You are trying to look for a specific piece of information. And it's so unique that no single source of information out there will meet your goal, right? So you have to find, a lot of different sources, try to piece things together to meet your information need. And same for applications, right? You may want to process information or see information in a certain way, but there's no applications out there that meet your specific need. So if we step back a little bit and look at how what the mismatch is, so basically in an application or maybe a web page even, is a specific system that developed by a specific group of developer. They somehow develop this understanding of how they think user, what the user would need. And they're correct for most part. And they propose this specific user interface that contains specific information and provides specific functionality. A user, under a very specific context, they may actually have a slightly different goal, right? They may want a slightly different interface, and they may want different pieces of information and functionality. So this is also true just for, just collecting information, right? The author of that article couldn't predict, right, what kind of information needs the readers will want. So David Carger phrases really well. He said that no developer can predict all the ways a user will want to record, annotate, and manipulate information. Right? So here's an example for you guys. So this is the Airbnb app. I use it a lot to find a place to stay when I travel. Now, when I look for places to stay, I care about both the price and the rating, right? But if you look at the interface, there's no rating on the map, right? For me to see the rating, I have to click on each individual one, and then the detailed view will show the map, show the rating, right? And you may say, well, there's a hard design trade-off. There's not much space on the map. We can't display too much. Fine, okay? Well, another factor that I consider is I usually want to travel with my dogs. I have 2 dogs, so I want to make sure the place I'm going, whether they're pet-friendly, so that I can consider whether I will bring my dogs, right? But to find that detail on this interface, right now, you can't, right? The developer decides that for this entity, the information that a user should see is the price, rating, number of reviews, whether it's free cancellation or not, or the style of the room, right? But I just care about whether it's pet friendly. So I have to dive into this detail, get into another detail page, right, to be able to find that feature. So this is what I'm talking about, right? Yes, you have a question? Okay? Yes.
So I'm curious how you see filters then?
Yes, so here, yeah, I understand your question. It's like, what if I can select a pet friendly as a filter, right? But I haven't decided whether I will, because I need to consider all these factors, right? So what I kind of want is whether there's a place maybe has a dog friendly icon, right? There could be places that do not have it, right? But if you use the filter, all the other things are filtered out, right? So this is exactly what I'm talking about. The software, yes, they provide some kind of ways for you to get there, but not exactly what you want, right? So here's another example. This may be, so like the developer of this website, right, determines what information you need, right? As a student, you may be curious about the faculty's office hour. You may care about their research area. Well, you have to dive into each individual one to find that detail, right? So let's zoom out a little bit, right? I think our pioneer, Douglas Engelbart, point out this problem really, really well, is that the augmentation means, maybe, if we sort of see the information system, we sort of design these systems based on our understanding of a large statistical population. And no attempts have been made to fit the individual needs. And to develop a system that really, he was trying to augment human intellect, the system should provide opportunity for significant adaptation of the individual to the individual's characteristics. Now, I think one thing that's really interesting is he pointed out this problem before digital applications were even invented, right? Before even personal computer. And I think fundamentally, this really isn't an HCI problem. It is kind of an economic problem, right? It is just more economic to abstract the common needs of a large population and develop reusable solutions for them instead of trying to develop a really customized solution for each individual user. And it's really for this reason that there's no grant writing or research proposal app. There's no family travel app. There's no organizing a dinner party app because everybody does it differently, right? It's just not economic to make an app that way. So then what do we have? Well, we have rigid apps that developers think, okay, here's how you should use it. Or we have bloated apps, right? One way to support all the users' needs is let's dump all the things they could, be potentially need into one app, and then becomes a super complex app that you cannot use. So that's at the application level. What about the activity level, right? If you think about how app is developed, the developer can, they prioritize optimizing the user experience within the app, right? But the operating system, who's supposed to provide more structure for us to coordinate our activity, what do they provide? Virtual desktop or, another just So, but then the user actually, right, when they need to work on these information activity, they need to coordinate a lot of, applications. So for example, research find that data science workers need to juggle 13 categories of applications in their daily work. Now, and also when I'm working on my research grant, well, I don't have an app, right? I have a lot of apps. And, I have to juggle all these things to achieve my activity. Same for organizing a dinner party, right? And you may use a different set of app, right? And that's the whole point. We all have our own workflow. So at the end of the day, we suffer from very fragmented workflow, right? And really challenging information management. And just on a daily basis, we have messy desktop and tab explosion. So I think this is the problem of the application-centric interface paradigm. We have rigid containers and bloated containers. We have fragmented workflow and challenging information management. But now we have AI, right? Things should be better. So let's take a look. So last weekend, I got my hands onto OpenAI Operator. I paid $200 to be able to use it. And so I was trying to test it with a case of organizing a dinner party because it was the Chinese New Year. So I opened it. Here's, sort of my interaction with it. So I started with, I'm thinking about organizing a dinner party. So it replied with these chat messages here are the things you should think about. I'm like, cool, that's useful. I probably will start think, about the menu. So I, followed up with operator and, give it a more, operator asked me about my preferences. So I replied, and then it gave me this initial menu. Well, so, I was curious, right? So I was like, okay, give me the recipes of these menus. Then the operator, goes ahead and does its kind of job, right? It opens this browser already. And so it will just, copy the text from the chat, search the recipes online, and, this is sped up like 5 times, okay? So, it's just doing all these browsings. And then after, I think, 5 minutes or maybe 4 minutes, it returned sort of this list of menus and recipes with links, right? So I wasn't very happy with the menu, to be honest, but I was just trying to keep it going to see, where things will break, right? So I asked it to generate a list of ingredients, and I also want it to help me check whether these ingredients are in store, for example, in Costco or, Whole Foods. So I basically give this prompt, and then I, went to grab lunch, and by the time I come back, it was still working. And I felt so bad. I was like, think about the trees that are being burned by the operator and the water that's being used to cool it. So, it was just running. It's just so long, so I had to pause it. So otherwise, maybe just run forever. So I paused it. And so I looked into this, right? So what was the problem? So I opened the drop-down list where you can see all its operations. So here is just a tiny bit of it. And we're all from computer science. One of the reasons things don't end is just somehow got into a weird loop, right? So basically, operator somehow start to loop itself by over this subset of ingredients for unknown reasons. So I pause it, then I just whatever, I move on, right? So the next thing I ask is I want to get recommendations for a few bottled wines because I want to treat my guests well, and replied, I'm unable to help with this. The first time I was like, wait, what's going on? Why? And here's my response. Its response. So I was like, I think I understand why. But then there's nothing I can do about it, right? It just give me the same response. So I accept the reality, and then I move on. So the next thing I asked is just like, well, let's move on to the activity after dinner. Any recommendations? And then operator become cheerful again, and then give me recommendations about board games and whatever. So I also had a few other interactions with it. It's like, what board games, would be suitable for a group of 10? How do I set a doodle up to, coordinate with them, right? So after 4 hours, I still wasn't able to actually to get to the dinner plan that I was happy with, but I was very exhausted because I have to do a bunch of screen recordings and all that stuff and waiting and then checking. And I think maybe the OpenAI operator was exhausted too. So here's what the interface looked like when I stopped, right? What did you notice? I still got a browser exploded with tabs, right? And there's also this very, very, very long chat history. So then where is my dinner plan? Well, there's no concrete form of it, right? It's somewhere in this chat. It's somewhere in all these tabs, right? And this interface is kind of the same as before, right? It doesn't have much meaningful information organization, which makes it really hard for me to overview, manage, or iterate on this activity. So wouldn't it be great if I have this environment where it can aggregate only the relevant information and functionality, but also provide really effective organization and representation of overall activity. So this is what the HCI community has been calling the activity-centered interface paradigm, or activity-centered computing. Now, before a large language model, this was actually really tricky, because to achieve this really personal environment, you need to be able to create an environment that support any user's information activity. They may be of any domains, any complexity, and their goal may change just during the activity, right? They may, the goal may shift. So how do we approach, maybe with the help with AI? Well, the current approach is let's just generate a sequence of actions, right, on top of the existing paradigm. What we were trying to think is, would it be possible to actually generate a good environment and then have the actions running on top of it? So we took this specification-based approach. Basically, when a user gives a prompt, like I'm thinking about organizing a dinner party, it will first generate what kind of organization you may need for organizing a dinner party. And then it will map those things to a UI. And then the UI will be rendered as this environment. So let me give you some example, right? Imagine I'm thinking of organizing a dinner party. You may care about people, location, time, right? And then UI specification will tell you or guide the system like, okay, what's the level of detail? What's the representation? And what's the interface organization that you may want to use? And then it will generate, put the right elements together. Now, you may have new needs or a new desire for your activity. And if you have follow-up prompts, it will sort of try to change the activity specification, like, dishes, ingredients, or, food restrictions when you are thinking about the menu, right? And then the activity environment will change. So you have this graphical user interface that GUI-based activity environment. So basically, this pipeline works this, right? When the user have a prompt on their data, the activity specification will guide the system like, okay, what are the information entities we provide? What is the structure among this activity? And the UI specification will basically guide the system to choose the right UI and then compose everything together. So on top of that, we also want the user to be able to directly manipulate the activity specification so that I can further adjust the UI based on my needs, because I know AI will make errors, right? And I also want to be able to adjust the UI, right? So I want to be able to adjust the overall information environment, but I also want to be able to adjust individual UI elements. And then eventually, hopefully, I will have generative, malleable, and personal activity environment. So does this work? So we have this pipeline, and it was like, will it actually generate something useful? So my PhD student, Rima, built this system, Jelly, which explores this pipeline and the efficacy of this pipeline. So I'm going to play a 4-minute video of a user using Jelly to achieve an information activity. So let's take a look.
Let's look at how Millie used the system Jelly to help her relocate for a new job in San Francisco. She opens Jelly.
I'm moving to San Francisco.
However, Jelly thinks she's trying to figure out a moving plan, so provides her with moving services and a budget. She deletes the fields she doesn't need and further prompts,
I'm finding a place to live. Tell me about different areas. I've heard some of them could be sketchy.
To support Millie reviewing how safe each area is, Jelly adds the safety level and relevant information to each area. To better compare these areas, she transformed the structure into a table and ranks the areas by safety level. She definitely doesn't want to live in this area and this. Commute time is also an important factor for her. She tells Jelly,
My company is on Market Street. How does a commute look like?
Jelly adds her company in the home panel and the commute time for each area in the table. It also suggests the 2 areas with the shortest commute time. Seeing this, Millie narrows her option down to Nob Hill and Mission District. She then asks Jelly,
What are the apartments in those areas?
Jelly then presents available apartments on the map with the details relevant to her interests, such as safety level and commute time. After some exploration, Millie has her short list of apartments. A few days later, the hiring manager tells Millie that she also has the option to work at the New York office. So she opens Jelly and changes the location from San Francisco to New York. Everything updates automatically, and she can reuse the structures for her decision-making. Millie decides that she prefers the San Francisco office. After she moves in, she wants to throw a dinner party to celebrate her new job and new home. She tells Jelly,
I'm hosting a dinner party with my friends.
Instead of directly generating the space, Jelly asks, Who are you going to invite? And then present her contact list. Millie selects Alice, Mike, and Sarah. Jelly then asks, When is the party? And presents a calendar.
Looks like next Friday night would be a good time.
With these details, Jelly then generates a home panel displaying the guests, menu, and activities. She reviews the dishes suggested for her and realizes some of them are not suitable.
Dennis and I are both vegan.
To accommodate this, Jelly adds a dietary preference to all the guests, updates the existing dishes, and adds a dietary suitability property for all the dishes. With the connections established by the underlying schema, Jelly updates the dishes that don't meet the restrictions. Millie deletes some of them and asks for more options. Seeing these, she also realizes Sarah prefers gluten-free food. Having figured out the dishes, Millie asks,
I'm new here, where to buy all the ingredients?
Jelly generates a shopping plan which contains a list of ingredients she needs to buy. It also shows the stores on the map, and Millie can review the items that she needs to buy at each store. While Millie is shopping, she receives a phone call from Mike asking whether he can bring his friend, David.
Of course.
She adds David to the guest list, and the dishes and ingredients are updated accordingly.
Looks like it will be a fun party.
All right, so that's the Jelly system. Like, I know maybe the text is too small and the video is probably too fast. This thing will be online very soon, then you can take a look later. But I just want to sort of step back and sort of compare these different approaches, right? You know, the current approach is try to generate these sequence of actions, right, on top of existing interface. And at the end, you have this really messy information environment and where you don't know where your activity really is. Whereas our approach is trying to generate the activity environment, right, using these underlying activity specification. And the AI can automate things on top of this environment, and the user can engage with the environment directly to sort of achieve their information needs. So let's break down the system just a little bit to help you understand maybe like how the system works. There's a bunch of details in the paper. But basically, this interface has three views, right? There's this activity specification, the user prompt region, and the generate interface. And this is just the design of our demo system, right? In a future system, you can imagine the activity specification doesn't need to always be there, right? It can be hidden from the user, or the prompt region can just be one small text box or through voice input, right? So the UI will just be the generated UI. And so the system works this way, right? When I have a prompt, it will generate this activity specification. It's just the model of the activity, right? The overall structure. And based on that, we'll generate a graphical user interface. So the way we generate things is based on the type of data in the activity specification. So for example, for that destination, I will generate a text box. For moving date, because of time, I will give a date picker. For the different areas, because it's a list, it's an array of data, right? I'm going to provide a list. And here, each area is mapped to the individual item in the list. And the apartments within the area are shown on a map, right? Because I have the geographical location of them. And each individual apartment will be shown twice, right? One as this card and then be able to expand to show more details. So this is sort of roughly how the system connects all the parts together. But basically, the idea is that we have this generative and malleable activity model, right, that drives the generation of the interface. Now, I want to note that the data that the system uses right now is generated by a large language model. And we do not advocate for this because the data will have errors, right? What we really want to focus on is just generating the overall specification itself. And in the future, we can, based on this specification, and use the correct APIs to pull in more reliable data. And another part that Jelly briefly touches on is these UI specification, right? And what we did is we have this simple set of UI mapping rules. And of course, well, that rule is small enough for us to test the pipeline, but it definitely has its limitations, right? If you look at the UI, right, this UI do not have the most effective organization of the different panels, right? Also, like here, the user can click on each item and then see the details, but it has the same problem as what I was showing in the Airbnb example, right? What about the apartment type? What about the move-in date? What about whether it's pet-friendly? I want to be able to see these things on this each little card here. So clearly, there are some limitation of the jelly system. Oh, here's another one, right? What if I don't want the map to be open on the side? What if I want it to be open in place, maybe just because I'm operating on a different screen, or maybe this is my preference, right? So what we really want is a very expressive UI specification that can describe really high quality, really diverse UI. And this specification needs to be both AI operable, so that AI can specify here is the right UI configuration for you to have the UI, but also end user manipulable so that I can adjust errors that AI makes. So how do we approach this thing, right? Like, how do we describe the unlimited, just numerous UIs out there? So we are quite inspired by the work that done by Christopher Alexander's work on pattern language for architecture. And this line of work has actually huge impact on software engineering and already on user interfaces. People have been coming up design patterns for developing softwares and good user interfaces. So what is a pattern? Well, according to Alexander's notion, each pattern describes the problem which occurs over and over again in an environment, and then describe the core solution to the problem. And in such a way that you can sort of use a solution 1,000,000 times over without doing it twice the same way. That's super appealing, right? I mean, that's what we want. We want have some way of generating UI, but we want it to be able to adapt to each individual user. So how do we achieve that? Well, he said, well, you need to identify the invariant in this problem, right? You want to identify the common properties among these problems, and then, based on those properties, you can vary a bunch of things. So in HCI, as I mentioned, we have been trying to sort of build upon this notion of design patterns, and we have a lot of work in this area. Even like practitioners are like, this is Apple's design guide for, these are the patterns that Apple promotes. But traditionally, these patterns need to be carried out by human designers, right? What we want is we want this pattern to be AI operable and user manipulable. So what are all the patterns out there? If we can identify all these patterns and make them more operationalizable, potentially we can achieve this technical pipeline, right? So we looked into one specific pattern, which we call, which is the overview detail pattern. So this is one project we also recently did. So if you don't know about the overview detail pattern, it's this pattern that's just super simple. It has two views, one overview, which shows a bunch of information entities, and a detail view, which gives you the detailed information about one entity. But it serves this very essential need when you're in an information activity, right? You want to browse a large amount of things, and then you want to dive into specific ones. And for this reason, the overview detail pattern is just everywhere, right? When you shop on Amazon, the search result returns an overview. You dive into it, you get a detail view. Airbnb is an overview detail pattern, follows that pattern, right? The map is an overview. Each card is a detail, but there's more detail views behind if you click into it. Booking a flight, your email interface is also an overview, right? You click into it, you get into detail. Or this is the Google Scholar, Google search page, right? It returns all the results, and then you can dive into specific detail. So all these interfaces, as I said, right, it uses a single instantiation of the pattern, right? You cannot do sort of adjust it. Well, some sites give you a little bit of customizability, but not fully. But this single instantiation is not going to meet everyone's needs, right? So what we did is okay, what if we can make this pattern malleable? So Brian led, my PhD student led this project, and we're trying to follow, Christopher Anderson's notion. Maybe first we should identify what are the common properties, right? So what we did is we collected 156 diverse websites, and then we try to identify the instances of overview detail pattern, right? And you see, we were able to identify more than 300 from 156 websites. It means this pattern is just really ubiquitous. And we distilled 3 key dimensions. The first one is layout. Basically tells you what are different layout in the overview, or what's the layout between overview and detail view. The composition, which is really the mapping of data across these different views. and the content, right? What kind of content will be shown in the overview and what kind of content will be shown in the detail view. Now, based on this, we were able to develop a system or several demonstration systems to show whether we can manipulate the configuration of overview detail interface. So let's take a look at some example applications. So this is a shopping application that we built with this malleable overview detail interface. So typically it works the same way as eBay or Amazon, right? You click into one, you will be able to see the details, and then you can go back and you find another one, you see the details here. So here I'm trying to look for the properties of a couch. Well, when I buy couch, the most important attributes I care is the dimensions, right? The width, height, and length, because I want to see whether it fits into my room. So here, basically in each detail page, I'm looking for these three attributes. But clicking into each individual page to see these attributes is really tedious, right? Why not just show it in the overview? So what I can do is I can activate this attribute mode, and I can select the attributes that I care, and I say, surface this in the overview. And in the overview, now I have these attributes. So this way, I don't need to get into a bunch of these items to figure out whether the dimension fits. So in addition to add details to the overview, you can also remove details you don't care, even though the developer thinks you should care. And you can just hide them, right? You can remove it from your overview page. Now, I still need to sort of open these individual items to see other attributes, maybe texture or whatever, and it's still quite tedious. What I can do is I can adjust the configuration to have things side by side so that I can easily go back and forth, right? And if I have details that I want to add, I can just drag the attributes from the detail view into the overview. So here I'm just dragging the couch into the overview. So this way I can just browse the overview really quickly. All right, so what am I doing here? I'm just trying to find, interesting couches, I guess. Okay, so, all right, what's next? Well, yeah, sometimes the attributes you care, the system may not have it, right? For example, I care about the total cost, but then the system doesn't have that attribute. But I can prompt AI say, I want this total cost attribute. So what it can do is can generate this new attribute by combining several existing attributes. So here, it also shows the attributes it uses to put together this attribute. And all the AI-generated attributes will have this mark indicate this is the AI-generated, and error may exist, right? So I can also change the overview layout based on the attributes I'm interested in. So here, this is the attribute of the seller's review count. So if I select that, now because it's a single numerical value, the system recommends, hey, do you want to view this actually in a histogram? Or if I can keep going and select other attributes, and now because I select two numerical value, it recommends a scatter plot. Now I can activate this scatter plot and then be able to see these things in a different arrangement. Now I also care about the color of the couch, right? But then it doesn't have that particular attribute, so I can prompt AI say, well, I'm being a nerd here. I was like, what's the hex value of the couch? Well, so what AI can do is, it can look at the text. Maybe there is a color attribute, or it can look at the image, generate the color property. And with the color property, I can, select it and then say I want to show it in a color space. Now this allows me to browse all the couches, based on color. So another thing that is really annoying when I'm shopping for things is, there is this inconsistency of the name of the item. And that's not because the platform's fault, because these names are provided by the vendors, right? Vendors are not going to talk to each other and say, hey, I'm going to use this convention, you should use that. So what we can do is we can ask AI to reformat the attributes so that I can easily identify the attributes. So as here I said, just show me the brand, resolution, and refresh rate. I think it's frame rate, yes. And then the names will be reformatted so that I can easily compare these things.
And here's another example of booking hotel. So finally, I can add the rating onto the map. So here I can click on a hotel that I'm interested in, turn on the attribute mode, and I can surface the rating attribute on the map, right? This way I can look at both the price and rating at the same time and only click on the ones that I'm interested in, which avoid a lot of unnecessary clicks, right? So I can open the one I care, collect it by clicking the collect button on the top left in the overview, in the detail view. But opening this detail view again and again is tedious, right? So I can pull up that collection button into the map as well. And this way I can just collect these hotels that I meet my criteria, and I can collect more and more. And after a while, I can open the detailed views of the collected items to compare them, right? Here's another example. So when I'm getting food delivered or using these food delivery apps, I care about the calories. But most of the shops don't show calories in their overview description. So what I have to do is to click into each one and find the detail. But here I can surface it to the overview, and this would allow me to just look at the overview to find the ones that I'm interested in. So let's zoom out a bit, right? The overview detail interface is a ubiquitous pattern because it supports one essential need of iteratively browsing many items to identify the ones that we're interested in, and then dive into specific ones for more details. So in this work, we identify the key dimensions of overview detail interfaces, and by supporting end user to manipulate the interface along these dimensions, we can achieve malleable overview detail interface. And what we are working on right now is to, based on these dimensions, and turn that into a specification module, which is pretty straightforward, right? So basically, we can consider all the data follow an array of JSON, basically, right? And the JSON describes the attributes of an item, right? And by just connecting an array of JSON with this specification module, it can turn that data into a configuration of overview detail interface. Figuring out basically what attributes to be shown in the overview, what attributes to be shown in the detail view, and what are the composition and spatial layout between the overviews and the detail views. Basically, that's the data format, right? We can turn it into a suitable configuration of overview detail. And that will be part of the UI specification. It's just a specific module, right? So this is just one example of a pattern that we studied. Actually, people have studied other patterns. For example, Bach et al., they studied the dashboard pattern in information visualization or information management systems. And there are other patterns that we can identify. Maybe some of them may be more application or maybe more scenario related, like messaging, right? There are so many messaging applications out there, email, Slack, Reddit. They all use different kinds of ways, like UI. But what if we can identify some common properties and then be able to have it be malleable? And there may be other patterns too. We are also interested in actually go a level down to identify or to develop a unified specification language for user interfaces. And this way we can make sure that all these modules are consistent. But also I think in the field of HCI, we don't really have a language to talk about UI. Right? A lot of times it's you should have that widget, you should do this. It's very based on intuition. We're using very imprecise vocabulary. But having this specification language probably will help us better describe user interfaces. So hopefully all these things would come together and become this UI specification module. That animation was a little dramatic. So yeah, this is sort of the pipeline that we currently explored. But I think there's one other component that will be super interesting, which is it is really not. It's fine to have AI generate and let the user be able to manipulate it. But it will be even better if the default generation just meet our personal needs, right? So how do we achieve this personalized generation? And I think it's really important to have context of what the user have been trying to do, what's the problem, what's the configuration they configured, and based on that, future generations for the user will have rich data to sort of generate the personalized interfaces. So this is the approach we are currently exploring to achieve this generative, malleable, and personal environment. So let's go back to these questions. What is the natural workflow of information activity?
Well, I think it is very dynamic and very chaotic and very personal, right? And why has the application-centric interface paradigm failed to reach this workflow? That's because apps are pretty rigid, they're impersonal, they're bloated, but they're also siloed. And the operating system provide no ways for us to coordinate them. And what's different this time with AI? Well, I'm not arguing, we can use AI to generate content. We can use AI to generate chat messages. We can use AI to generate actions on top of existing interface. But I think what we're exploring is to use AI to generate the information organization, right? So that humans do not need to put all these organizations together. So as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of my talk, this vision towards generative, malleable, and personal information environment goes all the way back to the beginning of digital computing, right? Licklider proposed that the human brain and the computing machine will be coupled tightly together. And for that to be tight, you want to be able to, you have to adapt to individual users' needs, right? And we know Douglas Engelbart pointed out that a system that augments human intellect should be able to adapt to individuals' characteristics. Alan Kay, also explored this really personal and dynamic media. And my colleague Jim Holland, introduced this notion of distributed cognition into the field. And Susan Butker also introduced activity theory into our analysis of interfaces. Basically, try to really argue that we should not look for individual artifacts like apps, but really look at the overall activity. And David Karger, have run this decade-long endeavor on Haystack that try to create this personal information environment. And recently, Michel Lafont and Wendy Mackay, proposed this concept of information substrates and a world without apps to try to help us get to this really flexible information environment. So I think we are at a really sort of historic moment where the vision of supporting dynamic and complex information activity with an intelligent and malleable and personal information environment is kind of achievable. So I'm clearly very excited about this, and I hope I passed a little bit of excitement onto you guys. But that's it. Thank you.
Hi, I've been in industry for a long time, and I really love this activity-centered approach. I'm way past human-centered design, right, into activity-centered design. And so I like this idea of closing the loop and then knowing what is the final determination of the task success or the activity success. And I wondered if you have any thoughts around that.
So I think really, the ultimate success is you are helping the user to achieve their goal, right, of the activity. And in the process, hopefully they don't need to feel very disoriented, right? They have this, really aggregated environment where the materials they need are in the right place, shown in the right way. So I think, a lot of times we're just putting it up with the messy organization, and we don't want to spend effort doing that because the payoff is unclear, right? So what we're doing here is we can have AI do that for you and provide lightweight interaction so that you can flexibly change the organization, right? So you don't need to do all the manual work. So hopefully by doing that, you can always stay on top of your activity and be able to, accomplish your activity faster. Or yeah.
And maybe this concept of when something is done is, we're just beyond that at this point. That it's just really the continuity of life and fitting into the fabric of someone's life. And there isn't the need to define what done is. And then it becomes, well, how satisfying or how supportive was that activity?
Yeah, so like, for example, when I'm working on a research grant, right, that is one activity. But then later I will pick it up, right? I will, that will sort of take another branch or maybe evolve to become another grant, right? So I think one thing that's super interesting is just see how this environment evolve as your daily life goes, right? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm wondering if you have a user interface that keeps changing. The user often, the first time they use an interface, they have to learn it in a way, right? They see it and they understand it, and the next time it goes faster. What are your thoughts on this learning activity of a new user interface when it's always different?
Yeah, so like a typical user interface is very static, right? So that you can maybe you can accumulate your learning over the course. But I don't think it's necessarily the case that this generative interface is incurring more learning costs, right? Especially when maybe personalization kick in, that when you're planning a dinner party this time, you somehow figure out the structure, but next time we reuse the structure, right? And then you can gradually expand it to it will evolve, right? So it's something that you crafted. So hopefully the learning is not that much. And do you have a follow-up? Huh?
Since the structure
Yes.
is very consistent.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm interested in you discussing a little bit more about like potential risk of personalized interface, thinking about like if in your view like your challenges around like information disparity become like enlarged because I'm seeing different things from what you're seeing, even though we're using the exact same app. Like I know you're giving out very much around like a more neutral example, but I can think about example of like Shargu and I bought the same display, but because our app are different, or our UI are different, it's personalized, we don't even know we bought the same one. That doesn't give us that common ground that we used to have when we have like a more static UI. Just curious about how you think this type of malleable or personalized interface will potentially address this risk.
So the biggest risk is you will have a personal silo because everything is generated just for you, and you are not doing. Like one thing that's really good for information foraging is you get to see a lot of different things, even though they may not be the thing you need, right? But you get to explore a really large area. And I think that's the problem with all generated content, right? When you prompt for have a video, like, okay, this video is good enough, you're just gonna refine it, right? You're not gonna like maybe browse online to see what are all the possible videos you can create, right? So, when we run our user study, a participant said, nice, this is generating the information that I need. Well, other websites, sometimes, I will come back to the parts that they provide, right? So I think one way to address this problem is still keep the, peripheral or other interesting information entities in the environment so they can say, oh, this might be interesting, I want to integrate it, or this is not interesting, that, I'm just going to remove it, right? So I think that's one of the bigger risks I see. And we also did a research project that really tried to encourage people to diverge during their information activity. So we have a paper last year at Kai, is really try to encourage people to do a lot more exploration. Like even if you don't want to diverge, we force you to diverge kind of situation. Yeah, that's a problem.
I'm thinking about the future of these. I find it instructive maybe to think about like the most widely used malleable user interface of all time, which is the text file. Like Untitled 1 or whatever it would be. And why do we use that in preference to things that are like more powerful? I think that there's like, hyperbolic discounting is a hell of a drug, and people are just muddling through whatever they're trying to do right now.
Yes.
And in doing so, like it's just good enough.
Right.
And then it becomes hard to convince them, like, oh, if your data were just slightly more structured.
Yeah.
You could get all of these nice filters and stuff. And it's like, well, I'm busy. I just need to finish the thing.
Right.
I'm curious. Like, it feels to me like that's been one of the major challenges of like this sort of line of work in the past has been it requires pretty substantial upfront like setup and drinking of Kool-Aid, and not in a bad way. Just like it's much more like a expert user interface tool, sort of more akin to something like Unix or the command line, than to something that like everyone would pick up and run with.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think whether the directions, to what extent you think that what you're doing here essentially can become the next version of like the Blackboard or the text file, rather than becoming sort of an application, rather than being sort of the generic space or new space of applications. It may still be an application, but I think you just want to get it to a point where it's like easier than just copy pasting stuff around.
Right. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard. I think we can get there.
Yeah, I think with this, maybe just the AI, what AI generates is good enough, right? Maybe people are not going to even do malleable interfaces. So I'm actually really curious about this. Like if we deploy the system out there, right? If the AI, at what part point, the user will actually just like, I'm gonna change this because I think that's the best, right? Or they're just gonna take whatever AI. Well, I can put up with this, right? So I'm curious. Like I think there's a lot of like cost evaluation there in terms like the cost changing it at the cost of just staying in your work and then put up with the existing one. Put up with the AI generated one. But I think one thing that's super interesting is though, like if we, some user are power user, right? They will maybe change this a little bit. Maybe some of these good configuration can spread or, to other, users. So I don't know, like I want to actually deploy this and really see how it works and how, how people balance the cost of these things. Yeah.
Not to like make it about the economic model, but since you had brought it at one point that like that's often the reason why that people are building these more rigid and bloated interfaces, I was wondering like if this is successful and we're able to have this really broad, like, widespread, malleable interface, I guess what do you think the role of like the companies that currently produce these interfaces would be like? Like, are they more like data providers basically, where they just share out the data, and does the problem sort of move upstream where they change what data they provide because they have, like maybe the way that they design the interface often is because of certain incentives they have on like what their company is trying to achieve. Like, yeah, I'm just curious how this like ecosystem might change.
Yeah. So the answer is I don't know, but I'm very curious about it. I think if you look at how how content are being served on the web, right? The company will serve HTML that has all the style, has some part of data, right? So I think, in the future, maybe they will still serve the data, but they could also serve a template, but maybe it's a just malleable template for you, right? Maybe Expedia just like, I really think the default configuration for this should be this, but you still have the ability to change it. And I think maybe some company will just give up on the UI side and say, hey, there are really good, well-designed UI module that's there, and I can directly connect my data into it, and they will have a reasonable UI. And I think that's really interesting. I think right now the designers have two jobs. Right? I think one is, figure out what is the best representation of the data, but second is try to identify the sort of context where there's information is being used. I think maybe in the future, the job of some designers who are designing these templates is to really design these UI packages in a way that is super flexible, but they don't need to assume, okay, in what context I want to show this, right? So they just need to define it in a really flexible way. But I think it's an question. I want to talk to some business, how they see the things. Yeah. Yes.
This topic reminds me of an adjacent area of information management, which is note-taking. Companies like Rome Research and Obsidian try to transform note-taking from a linear and compartmentalized approach into like a networked thought. So they try to mirror how nodes in our brains connect to each other. And softwares like that have a super loyal customer base, but it hasn't expanded that much over the years. And so I'm wondering, are there similarities that could be drawn between that model and like this
So I think what I'm trying to achieve with Malleable interface is that the user, they don't need to choose a camp, right? They can say that I'm really happy with the Notion's block style, right? Occasionally I may use obesity as graph, right? Or someone who's really into obesity and they can just like sometimes be able to connect the data together, right? So I think hopefully people don't need to be very loyal to one particular way, right? I think they have the ability to choose from a variety of things and based on their context. Like we actually interviewed a writer who used obesity and to manage their thoughts, and he happened to be a programmer, but he had to like build a lot of these customized software to extend it to really fit it into their workflow. But that's not possible for every user, right? So there's a very high skill ceiling there. Sorry, skill floor.
All right. I think we are at time, so I'm going to call it. Thank you again for your talk.